8 hours in a jet plane, 45 minutes in a taxi. Dinner out at my local Creole restaurant. Followed by an early night after some 12 hours of travelling. Probably deserve it. The most important part of this planning is actually getting out of my marina berth to the open sea. This whole bay of Le Marin is covered in coral heads, coral banks, frequently with only less than a foot of water over them. It's 26 miles from Le Marin to St. Lucia, so it'll take about 5 hours. Because I'm leaving French territorial waters, I have to clear customs and sign out of the country, just as you would if you were sailing, say, from the UK to France. Many of the islands operate on Sail Clear, which is an online system which retains the boat's details and crew details in order to make customs clearance simpler on arrival. Well, first trip out in the boat since I got back a few weeks ago, crossing over from Martinique, which is all that land in the background, towards Saint Lucia, Saint Lucie en français. It's a trip of about 25 miles. I motored for an hour coming out of the harbour, which you actually have to be quite... But, you know, I'd actually forgotten how nice sailing is. I'd forgotten how very pleasant it is to switch off the engine, have the head still up, pushing us along. And there's just the sound of little waves as the hull creates them as she plods along. I've got an average of about 15 knots on the beam, 90 degrees. I'm on a heading of 193, and actually my course over the ground is 208, 206, 208, which is for Rodney Bay Marina in St. Lucia. 16 knots. I've got a speed I'll turn it off maybe. Don't really need it on. I've got a speed over the ground of speed through the water of around 4.5 knots. Just under the full Jenny, 15 knots, 16 knots on the beam, and over the ground I'm making about 4 knots. Obviously between the islands there's a fair amount of tidal stream pushing through, so I'm punching slightly into it in order to make Rodney Bay. Just saw some flying fish, isn't it? I was slightly nervous about the trip. I hadn't It's just single-handed business. I've been up around a couple of places in Martinique. I've sailed around the island. I've sailed to a few anchorage places in Martinique, but I haven't gone foreign. So I filled out my sail clear form, and yeah, we'll see how the system works. Anyway, just wanted to say I'm really glad I'm doing this. Really glad. Rodney Bay Marina, Golden Haze. Do you copy over?
Rodney Bay Marina, can you switch to 10 over?
Golden Haze 10. Rodney Bay Marina, Golden Haze 110. Do you copy over?
Rodney Bay Marina, come back over.
Yeah, good afternoon to you. I'm a 10-meter sailboat. Would you have a berth for me for 3 nights, please? Over.
Roger, what is the shore power cycle on your vessel, over?
10 meters length overall, 10 meters.
Roger, your electricity cycles, over?
Yeah, my electricity is 220 European.
Roger, stand by.
Standing by.
You can proceed to slip number Charlie 19 at C19, over.
Charlie 19. Can you give me any clue where that is?
Charlie 19, that's the third dock to the south of the stern to the dock fenders will be on your port side. Bow in fenders will be on starboard, over.
Okay, Charlie 19 on the southern side. Okay, I'll turn down there.
Roger.
We just take the midships. Sorry, I didn't expect pontoons. You're in a Ruskin Park. Despite having filled out the boring forms online in Martinique, the St. Lucia country rules state that on arrival on St. Lucia waters, you must clear it immediately without delay or risk being fined. All yachts must check in with port health before clearing, and with customs, and then with immigration. A crew list and the filled out Maritime Declaration of Health must be presented to the port health officer on arrival. So, having parked up, I trotted along to the Customs and Health Clearance Office next door to the Marina office. Pretty hard work, despite having filled out the sail clear form before leaving. The officials were really nice and helpful, and as I was the only customer for most of the time, it only took an hour or so. I was then pointed to the health office, where the nice lady there gave me a severe telling off for not having filled out the health form prior to arrival. I didn't know it existed. I was forgiven and pointed to the cash desk, and a nice guy there took me for 15 Caribbean dollars, about £5. In the Marina office, they relieved me of around 75 quid for 3 nights in US dollars, about the same price as the French Caribbean islands. I couldn't plug into their Marina power system. They run 220 volts on a non-standard system, and they didn't have any 3-pin to 4-pin adapters for hire, despite this being a frequent problem for visiting boats apparently. They told me I could buy their type of 4-pin plug at the Chandler's in the Marina, or Hudson's DIY store just across the road for slightly less money. Hudson's very kindly made up the adapter for no charge and hit me for only 20 quid for the adapter. Back to the boat, plugged into the mains, got the router running on the excellent Marina Wi-Fi. My Digicel didn't connect, and I had dinner out and then a nice late Netflix evening. The next day went out to explore and visit the boatyard. It's well organised and half the price of the yard at Le Marin, but you're not allowed to sleep on the board of the boat whilst it's being hauled to Antifoul. The local B&Bs and studios want around $65 a night, which added to a meal out for around, say, $35 US, makes it the same price or more than the boatyard in Martinique. There's a pleasant but tiny swimming pool, and there's a fairly large convenience store, which unfortunately majors mainly just on booze and soft drinks and so on. It's got a tiny department with some frozen food, but there's nothing in the way of fresh vegetables or fruit or anything like that, and it's not really useful to the average cruising boat. 3 or 4 restaurants in the Marina facility, and I'm afraid it's a long walk to other local hostelries, which are not that special when you get there. The Marina sort of reminds me of a less successful and much smaller version of Port Solent. A marina surrounded by a couple of housing estates and a big car park, really. The marina is pretty deserted, and it's certainly not vibrant. The marina infrastructure is well maintained, and there were several boats that had clearly arrived with the Ark, but just never moved on. The fees are pretty similar to those in the French islands, but the area is pretty uninspiring, so I decided to head out back home to Le Marin. It's really hard for me to remember 20 years ago when I was sitting here on anchorage in Rodney Bay, St. Lucia, making one of my very first videos all the way back then. Anyway, this has been sitting here in Rodney Bay Lagoon, St. Lucia. It's very hard for me to remember when I was back in UK waters what I thought blue water cruising was going to be like. What sort of boat did I need? What sort of equipment did I need? Was I a good enough sailor to be able to do it? Anyway, this has been it's been a good visit. Australian catamaran, American catamaran, lots of British boats. Something along at over 6 knots, six and a half knots, 6 1/4 knots, 25 knots of wind at 60 degrees off the bows, with just the jenny, full jenny out. French customs entry form, which is controlled by the Marina office. You never actually see the customs people. Because Golden Haze has returned from a foreign country, I now have the right to keep her in French waters for another 18 months, to the end of 2025, without having to pay VAT, tax or anything else. My library of digital sailing books is at gentlesailing.com, so you can buy them as instant downloads. There's a link to a printer who can convert them to hard copy if that's what you prefer. I've just totally updated and republished French Canal Routes to the Mediterranean, which is now in its 12th edition and is fully up to date with new information, charts and pictures. Recently I published Your Boat in the Sun, which proved an instant popular success. It's about where to keep your boat in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean and the costs and the logistics involved. The Atlantic Crossing Guide has become a bestseller and it outsells most of the others, probably because it's arguably one of the most comprehensive guides to sailing to the Caribbean that's available. The Gentle Sailing Route to the Mediterranean is one of the most popular publications that I have. It describes how to coast hop all the way to Gibraltar without having to spend a night at sea. There are books about marinas in the Med, sailing in the Caribbean islands, as well as a book on simple navigation, and even a Pacific Ocean crossing guide, and a book about just living aboard a sailing boat. Anyway, it's all at gentlesailing.com. So please do pay the site a visit and browse through my publications if you have a moment. Thanks. Fair winds.